my name is Luke Marr, and this is Hot Mode, and today on Hot Mode we are going to be talking about the rise of Balenciaga as one of fashion's most popular brands. We'll discuss the brand's history, we'll analyze its current artistic director, we'll talk about how its marketing strategy has made it the brand it is today, and we'll address the accusations of copying and idea theft. But before we get into the actual video, if you guys are looking for a channel that talks about fashion in the most fun, sassy, bitchy, and analytical way, this is it, so you can go down below, hit the subscribe button, and turn on my post notifications. I mean, like, what do you have to lose? And if you want to see more from me, you can follow me on Instagram at HotLamode. I post some pretty poppin' fashion memes, and my Instagram stories are always pretty lit. I also am rolling out a brand new Snapchat feature. I don't know exactly what my name is on Snapchat. I think it's Hot Lamess. Essentially, my Snapchat will just be like where I'm actually spilling like a shit ton of the real tea. Like, you guys can ask me questions and I can talk about things I don't get to talk about here on YouTube or on my Instagram. But now let's get back into the video. So for a while, I've been getting a lot of messages and tweets asking me why Balenciaga's Instagram is so fucking weird. And while trying to figure out why it's probably one of the most outlandish fashion brands on Instagram, I realized that its Instagram was only just a small piece of the puzzle. And the puzzle was, why has Balenciaga captivated the world with its ugly and ironic sneakers, shoes, clothing, and accessories? So the brand has become known for co-opting everyday fashion items since March of 2016. And I mean, some of its most well-known and headline-garnering pieces have been their take on the dad sneaker, their take on the Antichrist of fashion, Crocs, and their take on the iconic IKEA Frakta bag. And I mean, these are only a few of the items that have taken over the fashion and luxury sector of Instagram. Twitter has used Balenciaga for meme content an abundant amount of times, and BuzzFeed is high-key obsessed with Balenciaga and its exorbitant prices. But I think the moment that Balenciaga really broke away from the pack was when US presidential candidate Bernie Sanders was asked what his thoughts were on the Balenciaga Fall 2017 menswear collection, which was highly reminiscent of Bernie's campaign art style.
These are a number of people, models on a runway in Bernie clothes. Did you ever think that you would become a fashion icon?
No, not quite, Jake. I think of my many attributes, being a great dresser is, or a fashion maven is not one of them.
These injections of one of fashion's most well-known luxury brands into both mainstream media and pop culture transcended fashion's usual marketing ploys, like celebrities carrying Louis Vuitton bags or Gucci making a custom wardrobe for a music video. Balenciaga was actually making the world watch and listen to what it had to say. This was something that no brand had ever actually done before, and it was all thanks to a young and creative artistic director named Dino Vasalia. Dino Vasalia was born in 1981 in Soviet Georgia. He recalls loving social uniforms because of the way it made people perceive you, and because it was one of the only ways to stand out in a country that deemed fashion a Western ideal and a function of capitalism. Following his parents' wishes, he decided to study finance and eventually graduated with a degree. But when he was confronted with a job offer in a finance office, he decided he couldn't do it and freaked out. He took a leap of faith and decided to study fashion at the Antwerp Royal Academy of Fine Arts. The school was famous for some of its graduates, most well known the Antwerp Six, who included Anne de Meulemeester and Dries Van Noten, and the group's unofficial seventh member, Margiela. His family was poor after having to become refugees from Georgia due to ethnic cleansing, and for the most part they couldn't help him financially. Often Dino would have to choose between fabric for classes and food, but he did find nutrients in the head of the fashion department, Linda Lapa. She instilled in him that every piece that he was to create had to have a customer in mind, and if it didn't, it had to be changed. After graduating, he decided to move to Paris in order to find a job, which he found at Maison Margiela, only a few years after Martin had left the label. Dino really enjoyed his time working at Margiela, and I mean, saying enjoying might be minimizing his experience. It seemed to be a really formative time for him as a designer. But after a few years at Margiela, he decided he would move on to one of Paris's most well-known brands, Louis Vuitton. Dino eventually worked his way up the ladder to becoming a senior designer for Louis Vuitton's Womenswear. His first boss was Marc Jacobs, who he described as being extremely fun. Between the permanent karaoke machine in the studio and Kate Moss showing up for impromptu parties, getting paid was just the cherry on top. But after Marc left the position, Nicolas Ghesquière was hired to become the new creative director. Nicolas was beloved by the industry for reinventing a dusty old house by the name of Balenciaga. And Nicolas was the polar opposite to Marc, and he strived for precision and perfection, and treated the studio like a scientific laboratory. I mean, which is cool and all, but like I'd rather be drinking champagne with Kate Moss, wouldn't you? During Dimna's time at Louis Vuitton, he and two friends decided they would start their own brand. The brand would be called Vêtements, which was the French word for clothing, and they decided that it would be more of a fashion democracy rather than a fashion dictatorship. The name was chosen to disguise the three anonymous designers, but eventually the name just stuck. Dimna then went on to quit Louis Vuitton and put all of his time and energy into Vêtements. The brand mostly looked to vintage and thrifted items in order to deconstruct them and then reconstruct them in abstract ways. The brand first became recognizable for its $330 DHL t-shirt. And soon, its embroidered sweatsuits, crazy lighter heels, and big brand collaborations with the likes of Reebok, Champion, and Juicy Couture, just to name a few, took off. Mainstream media found a really easy story in this $330 DHL t-shirt, and they just started to write about the brand as often as they could, although it was usually lambasting it for its exorbitant prices. But all this press really meant something, because nobody batted an eye at a $40,000 Louis Vuitton steamer trunk. And luckily, all this press paid off because in October of 2015, François-Henri Pinault, the head of Kering, announced that Dimna Vasalia was going to be the artistic director of Balenciaga. Kering, which is a fashion conglomerate that consists of Gucci, Saint Laurent, Alexander McQueen, and Balenciaga, had already tried hiring a young designer with their own hyped-up label in order to lead Balenciaga, and it hadn't worked. The fashion industry had loved New York creative Alexander Wang for his downtown chic look, but they had no love for his blah Balenciaga collections. And Alexander hadn't pushed the brand forward in its brand image or in its finances, which in fashion means you failed miserably. The fashion crowd was quite perplexed at how a designer like Dimna, who made jeans and hoodies, was supposed to take on the legendary house of Balenciaga, which was known for its innovation and architectural design. Cristobal Balenciaga was a Spanish designer and seamster, which essentially means somebody that can actually fucking sew, and it said that his design capabilities were unmatched. And the press often wrote about how he created one couture garment himself every collection, but never told anybody which one it was going to be. That's like fucking 80 hours of like sewing and shit, so like it's pretty important. It means he was really good, okay? Cristobal Balenciaga and Christian Dior revolutionized Paris' fashion scene in the 50s and 60s. Balenciaga unfortunately closed his house in 1968, and Christian Dior, with his business acumen, was often the most remembered of the time period. So baby Balenciaga got no love. And for many, it was hard not to see the differences between Dimna and Cristobal Balenciaga. Balenciaga didn't create garments to impress his clients, he created garments to impress himself. Meanwhile, Dimna's whole mission was to create pieces that his customer could actually build a wardrobe out of. Balenciaga's pieces were also the definition of couture, and he invented silhouettes like the sack dress and the cocoon coat, while Dimna preferred to work with pieces he already knew, like puffer coats and sweatsuits. And while their differences were obvious, their similarities were actually there. Balenciaga would often purchase pieces from his contemporaries like Chanel and V&A in order to deconstruct them and find out the techniques that they had used to create them, while Dimna was known for deconstructing and reconstructing pieces in abstract ways. Balenciaga also didn't have a problem with his clientele not being stick-thin, and often told his team that he preferred for his clients to have a stomach. And while Dimna was called out for his very white castings in the beginning of his career, he never picked models that looked of the social norm. He always went for alternative-looking models. Previously, we talked about Balenciaga's innovation and architectural design. And from my last video, you know that I'm a stickler for keeping the brand's aesthetic in mind at all times. But luckily, Dimna has been able to stay true to himself while incorporating a lot of Balenciaga-isms. The padded blazers and coats from his debut Womenswear collection and the sharp architectural blazers from his debut men's collection shows that he knows how to take on the architectural aspect of Balenciaga. And his over-the-top couture pieces from his fall 2017 Womenswear show and the layered coats from his fall 2018 show shows that he understands the importance of both the couture aspects of the brand and the innovation aspects as well. Dimna definitely dips in and out of Balenciaga's aesthetic depending on the collection, but there's no denying that he respects the house codes fully. Now, when Dimna started working at Balenciaga, it was a fucking transformative experience, at least for a younger me. But often, my friends that worked in the industry for a long time rolled their eyes at me every time I talked about how great Dimna was. I obviously was like, but eventually they would go on to say that it was just a rehash of Margiela, and they weren't wrong. Martin Margiela's design aesthetic was based on the deconstruction and reconstruction of vintage and thrifted finds with impeccable tailoring and polish. Feels like somebody that you know? So Demna's love of vintage and thrifted items and deconstruction and reconstruction was shared by Margiela, except for the fact that Margiela had been doing it since Demna was literally 8. And often, Margiela's shows were the most innovative and well-known in the world. Martin had already developed a shoe that was so ugly that it literally made you vomit on sight, and it was called the Tabby. He had already done the Panta-shoe in an array of colors, and he had already sewn completed garments on other completed garments and put them down the runway too. So it's more than fair to say that Demna ripped quite a few pages out of Martin's playbook. And if you're thinking, oh well, Demna worked at Margiela for a while, yeah, Martin had already done those collections 10 years before Demna even started at Margiela. It also probably didn't help that Diet Prada ripped Demna a new one every time a Balenciaga or Vetements collection reminded them of a Margiela show. And from what I've heard, although this might not be true, Martin was rather furious about all the attention Demna was getting for ripping off his designs. As he should be. If it was me, I'd shove the big toe of my Tabby boot so far up his ass he'd have a fucking white leather tongue. So, we've established that Demna's not the most original, but Balenciaga Couture and Margiela knockoffs are not the reasons that Balenciaga is one of today's most popular fashion brands. So let's get to spilling the real tea. One of the first reasons that Balenciaga is so popular is because in 2015, Alessandro Michele debuted his first Gucci collection. He single-handedly reintroduced maximalism into fashion and allowed us all to dress in clashing prints, tacky motifs, and the 70s attire that you really didn't fucking need. Gucci and Balenciaga, as we said before, are both owned by Kering. And when Demna started at Balenciaga, he ran fully with the maximalism trend that Gucci had started. I mean, he may have taken more of a, I'm gonna wear my platform Crocs all day, every day kind of stance on the matter, but both brands took the ideas of turning fashion don'ts into fashion do's. And this furthered each of the brand's influences without stepping on each other's toes and business. To answer the original question of why Balenciaga's Instagram is so weird, you have to take a look at Demna's creative team. He's kept it pretty consistent throughout his time at Balenciaga, using the same producer and makeup artist. But the image creation is heavily influenced by Johnny Dufort, a photographer, and Loda Volkova, a stylist. They're kind of crazy, at least in terms of fashion people. They love vulgarity, wearing offensively tacky clothes, getting really dirty, and the mundane, which is all the things that normal fashion photographers and stylists tend to avoid. I mean, the reason there's a Balenciaga clad model on a Segway is they don't care about what people think of Balenciaga, and the more that they don't care, the more people seem to relate to it. The brand image of Balenciaga is extremely important, and if you make the brand image look like the Tana Mojo of fashion, obviously people are gonna keep fucking watching.
What the fuck did you say to that? Hit me! Can I talk to your manager?
Staying on the topic of brand image, brands like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Hermes, Dior all like to keep their brand image as pristine and luxurious as possible. This helps them sell their extremely expensive handbags and luggage and suiting and dresses. But Balenciaga, on the other hand, stays as far away from all of that as possible. It tries to be the antithesis of luxury and wealth. I mean, how many luxurious people do you know that wear dollar tights out and about? Probably none. The Balenciaga brand image is independent, buck wild, and probably gets its stomach pumped a few times a week. And the thing is, people love to have a good time, so they want to spend their money with a brand that likes to have a good time too. I mean, even if those perfect, amazing, not getting in trouble at all Instagram couples are wearing Balenciaga's Triple S sneakers, it means they're doing something right. I mean, ew that this heteronormative couple thing is happening, but it's proving my point. Speaking of the Triple S, Demna creating the ultimate dad sneaker might have been his best idea ever. Not only did he reinvent an American parental trope, but he also seems to have known that hypebeasts and sneakerheads were ready to buy. If you look at his first men's show and then look at all of the men's shows after, he went from super femme to hypebeast motherfucker real quick. And fashion pre-Demna at Balenciaga saw a rush of Supreme lovers and Jordan loyalists. I mean, have you watched those complex Supreme line videos? If they couldn't tell from the 10-year-old rich hustlers at sneaker conventions, or the insane amount of sneaker stores that were popping up all over the world, a la Flight Club, there was a lot of money to be made from the sneaker trend. So when Demna showed his fall 2017 menswear show, the world was horrified by the clunky, dumpy, big sneakers that went down the runway. But little did they know that the Triple S and the Balenciaga Speedrunner were going to be the new it bags of fashion. With social media and the internet being the main way that people communicate and get their news, it was kind of scary to see that Demna allowed his creations to be turned into memes and internet jokes. It was something that had never been done before, but it was also extremely scary from a brand image perspective. And while stuffy brands like the Chanels and Louis Vuittons of the world would be terrified of just letting their creations run rampant on Twitter, Balenciaga actually embraced it. The IKEA Frocta bag made headlines, and so did the Panta shoe, and so did the Triple S. So it begs the question, at what point did Demna start creating pieces in order to garner headlines? Some might argue that it was the leather shopping bag, others might say it was the t-shirt shirt, but most would agree that it was probably the platform croc. Now you're probably wondering, well, why would he create these pieces if he knew that they were going to get roasted on social media? Well, it's called free advertising, my dear. And I mean, if people knew that crazy items were going to show up on Balenciaga's website, they were going to keep checking it often in order to talk about it. And if people didn't know what Balenciaga was, they probably were going to find out about it through BuzzFeed's front page. If he wasn't going to get headlines for good design, he might as well get them for bad design. It kind of reminds me of somebody else that I know.
Hello, you people know a lot about trucks. Bing, bing, bong.
All of this Balenciaga hullabaloo is really because Demna understands the internet and its culture, which is kind of like a riptide. If you fight against it, you're gonna drown. And if you never put yourself in it, you're probably never gonna reap the benefits. But if you put yourself out there and just roll with it, you'll be fine. I think. I don't know. Also, don't take my word as this is how to deal with a riptide because, you know, it's just a fucking analogy. Look up an article about it, okay? Demna's brilliance is also found in his ability to use current events to his advantage. When discussing Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, it's hard not to remember the political divisiveness of the 2016 US presidential election. It was very nasty and filled with so much hate, but somehow, Demna got Bernie Sanders to laugh out loud on national television about being seen as a fashion icon.
Did you ever think that you would become a fashion icon?
To be able to use fashion as a tool to create joy in probably the most tense political time the United States has ever seen is something that will go down in fashion history. When's the last time a Maria Grazia Dior collection came out and made me laugh? The final reason Balenciaga is so popular revolves around Demna's old head of department, Linda Lapa. She instilled in Demna that he must always have a customer in mind when creating a piece. The thing is, Demna might not have the exact customer in mind, but with his ability to get his product out into the world using free advertising and the internet, he doesn't have to seek out a customer. His customers often now seek out him. In conclusion, Demna Fasali's Balenciaga has been like Moses leading the fashion industry to the promised land. It feels like we've been stuck in the desert for 40 years, but we're finally getting to the promised land part. Demna has been quintessential in establishing fashion in the age of the internet, and for us, and Demna's Balenciaga, this is only the beginning. So please let me know what you guys thought of the video, please let me know if it answered any of your questions, and I can answer some of the questions in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys on Tuesday with the review of the VMA's red carpet. Thank you so much for watching again, and TTYL.